There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Hey, this is Kiran Agrahar from the Sparking Entrepreneur Show, and today we have Brett Smith with us. Brett is a leader in risk management and disease reversal. With a deep understanding of metabolic health, he is on a mission to merge our healthcare system with effective prevention strategies. He's a hero to share insights that have transformed his life and the lives of many others. Let's dive in with Brett on healthcare today. So, Brett, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kieran. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Very, very excited to host you. Let's begin with why did you choose the route that you're on today? Why did you choose the path that you're on today? And what led you to the path?
Well, you can say I'm a coach these days. I've kind of always been a coach all the way back to my teenage years. I was raised in a tennis family, and one of my first jobs was teaching tennis at different tennis clubs and country clubs and recreation departments. And I found out that I have a passion for teaching people and helping and coaching them. Um, in my life, I've always been in sales professionally, career wise. And from there, my whole strategy is you sell through teaching. You have to help somebody understand why the product or service is good for them. It's not about a pressure. It's not about twisting arms. It's about, is this going to solve a problem for you? Let me teach you how that's going to happen. And that's been kind of the premise of my whole sales world. I have spent most of my time in the employee benefits, kind of the health insurance, population health management, which is two distinct areas, corporate wellness and disease management worlds. And then also a little in pharma. So sold a couple blockbuster drugs that have were 20 years ago and still big drugs in the world today. And with all of that, I've just kind of realized that the way our healthcare system is set up currently, it's all designed to go after a symptom of a condition and mask that symptom with a pharmaceutical so you no longer feel the symptom, but it never gets at the root cause of what's going on. This is an incredibly wild, profitable way of attacking health for all the players, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare systems, which unfortunately almost all of our doctors left private practice and now work for systems. And they realize that those golden handcuffs that tie them are burning them out. They're not getting the results with their clients. They don't necessarily always understand why, because they don't yet understand that the training they got in med school doesn't cover the totality of what's in the medical literature. And if they were taught what's in the gaps of what they're not being exposed to, they would suddenly be on a mission to rapidly improve the health of all of their patients. And they would wind up becoming, instead of prescribers of medication, they would be deprescribers of medication. And they would be titrating their people off of all their meds because probably 80% of them aren't necessary for lifelong chronic conditions that aren't really lifelong chronic conditions. They're just a result of how we eat and the lifestyle and the terrains with new relationships with electronics, the blue lights that we're looking at going at our screens, our phones, our TVs, the LED bulbs. All of these things are changing how our body works, functions, how our hormones work, and it's resulting in, in most industrialized countries around the world where everybody's becoming fat, sick, and chronic, and it's an epidemic around the world. So it's pretty easy to fix, and that's now what I do. I help people
So,
individually work their way through all of that, and then help them share what their doctors need to know so that they can have the doctor as part of the team as well.
so the diseases that you just mentioned were chronic, right? So let me mention two of the diseases, and you tell me if it is reversible, and what are the current meds that doctors are proposing, and if the meds do really work. And I know these diseases personally. I've seen these diseases around me. So diabetes, it was not as easily caught in India like 200 years back or 100 years back. It was not a chronic disease in India, but now every other person has it, right? So that's one. Tell me about bipolar a little because I've seen people suffer through it. Are these diseases really reversible, or do they have to be treated as a chronic disease and the meds has to be taken for a longer period of time as compared?
Those are two excellent questions or diseases that you picked there. And let's start with the diabetes. And there's two different kinds of diabetes. There's type 1, which is more of an autoimmune, where in the pancreas, the inlets that create the insulin just get attacked and stop creating the insulin. And so somebody's not able to functionally move the glucose properly around the body and utilize it properly. And if left un, untreated, they're going to eventually kind of go into what's called diabetic ketoacidosis. And so they need to be probably injecting some level of what's called exogenous insulin that they're going to, they're not making it endogenously. It's from the outside in. And many people now, with the understanding of metabolic therapy and new strategies of basically the simplest way to put it is, and you touched on this with how you asked the question. Hey, Brett, 100, 200 years ago, this wasn't an issue. Well, what's changed, Kiran, in the last 100, 200 years? It's what we're eating. And in parts of the world where there's heavy tech customer service centers that people are now, instead of living under more of the sun, and we're changing rapidly from incandescent light bulbs into these LED light bulbs, which create blue light toxicity, and they're staring at computer screens all day while they're talking on the phone, and have all of these things are contributing to changes in the body that are not beneficial. So some of it is when we're talking type 2 diabetes. And this was where my epiphany happened in 2018 after over a decade of selling corporate wellness programs, one of them to one of the largest healthcare systems in my state here in Wisconsin. They were a disease management customer of our company for 5, 6 years. I realized when I found a woman by the name and an MD, a doctor by the name of Dr. Sarah Hallberg, in 2018, she has a TED Talk that has now 11 million views on it. And she goes, the way to reverse diabetes is to start by ignoring the guidelines. Because the guidelines are kind of, if you really understand what they're doing, they're just simply stating, eat whatever you want, inject the amount of insulin you need to tap down your glucose from going too high, keeping your fasting glucose in what's called a hemoglobin A1C, a metric that is the dividing line. And once you get here and how we do it in America, you move from 6.4 on a A1C metric to 6.5. Kiran, you just magically became a type 2 diabetic, even though the day before when you were 6.4, they didn't consider you were considered pre-diabetic. Well, it all goes back to actually the root cause, which nobody looks at and they're not taught to even understand. Most doctors can't explain insulin resistance and how it manifests inside of the body. And so really, all of the conditions that most of the physical conditions and mental conditions are just the fact that the body spends up to 15 to 20 to 25 years in this insulin resistant state through the food, through the blue light toxicity that is now changing our whole world. And it manifests into these conditions. So if anybody just goes, pulls up Dr. Sarah Hallberg, types into YouTube, reverse diabetes by ignoring the guidelines, they can watch a 20-minute presentation where she goes, this is how you reverse diabetes. This is how you reverse obesity. Everything that we're doing is set up to make sure that we believe it's a chronic progressive condition so that insulin gets sold every month at hundreds of dollars of cost to the patient, that we keep buying the Doritos and the Ho-Hos and the Twinkies and the breakfast cereals that are spiking the heck out of our glucose, which is what over years of use turns into insulin resistance. It flips us out of our native metabolism. And this is the one overarching easy way to explain it. Every child who's been born on this planet inside of our species is born in the state of nutritional ketosis. Whether the mother is in ketosis, like all of our ancestors were always, for the most part, the baby in the womb is born in that state of nutritional ketosis, in what we would call a fat burning metabolism. The default energy source for us as we're born and in the womb becomes fat, our fat that we eat or have on our body. Um, then when traditionally, it's kind of scary how some people have, and some organizations, very self-serving to themselves, have taught us to, well, don't breastfeed, just use these formulas over here. The formula is the
Mhm.
fastest way of moving the baby out of that fat metabolism into a new modern metabolism that we've adopted over the last 100+ years, called sugar burner metabolism. Doctors aren't taught about this in medical school. And so what happens with all of this is that as you're no longer staying fat adapted, which the baby's breast milk or the mother's breast milk is in the 50 to 60% spectrum saturated fat. What have we demonized in this world? Saturated fat. We've demonized sunlight. We've demonized red meat. We've demonized anything that's an animal product. There's lots of other reasons for all of this, but let's just not even go into that. That's a whole nother conversation. But as we start Oreo, ice creaming, applesaucing, juice boxes our kids out of their native metabolism, they enter this blood sugar roller coaster that is now the new metabolism, the sugar burner. And this is where all the disease comes from. And it's from years of working towards insulin resistance. But most kids these days aren't even eligible for the military by the time they get out of high school, because they're so metabolically broken already that they're overweight. They're having now, we used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset, because usually only kids kind of got type 1 because they had that autoimmune issue that attacked the pancreas. Now we've got kids in grade school that are already adopting what we used to call adult onset, that didn't used to happen until the 50s or 60s in somebody's lifestyle or lifetime. It's happening in young kids now. We have a third of the young kids still in school exhibiting fatty liver disease, and we never used to see fatty liver unless somebody was a chronic alcoholic. And we had to suddenly, about 20 years ago, change the definition from fatty liver and add a new definition called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because and it's now 40% of the adult population and a big chunk of the childhood population. It's just what we now call the diseases of modernity, because we're the only species smart enough to be able to re-engineer everything that we eat and dumb enough to actually eat it. There's not another animal species on this planet that has to be taught what to eat. They inherently know, they go and do it. We've moved away from what we inherently knew, what we've done, and we're paying the price for it. So diabetes within 6 weeks, completely reversible. No need, they can have their electronic medical record stamped. You are no longer diabetic and be off of insulin, be off of metformin. Some people, it might take a little longer, but it can be done quicker. I mean, people can come down hundreds of units of insulin. Not that I'm going to do that. Them and their doctors are going to work through this. Some of the doctors aren't aware of other guidelines that are available, which explain and teach all this. I share that with the patient to give to their doctor. And but then from the whole, when you mentioned, was the other one bipolar? Was that the second?
Yeah.
So if everybody would just go to, there's another great podcast focused on the mental health aspect of metabolic health and metabolic therapy. It's called Metabolic Mind. And it's an incredibly fascinating story behind how that podcast launched. There is a family that is a billionaire family out of San Francisco called the Bazooki family. And Mr. Bazooki formed the Roblex Corporation, which is what made him a billionaire. And with all of those resources, their Stanford college son started exhibiting bipolar with 40 doctors and 80 different medications. Everything everything in the healthcare world accessible to him, he still wound up becoming kind of a homeless street living person because he just couldn't, because of the bipolar, function. Eventually, Mrs. Bazuki came across Dr. Chris Palmer, and Dr. Chris Palmer wrote this book called Brain Energy. He's a psychiatrist at Harvard University, and he has been reversing bipolar, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia in his patients through the use of the ketogenic diet that back in the 1920s, Mayo Clinic designed as a way to manage children with epilepsy. Well, now we know that if they follow a strict metabolic therapy, a nutritional ketosis approach specific for epilepsy, typically for 5 years, the kid no longer has epilepsy anymore and doesn't have to stay on that more restricted diet. So their son was treated with ketogenic therapy, with metabolic therapy, just with food and understanding what to eat, reversed his bipolar. The parents are like, oh my God, we have to share this with the rest of the world. And that's where they then jumped in and created the website and the podcast and are putting millions of dollars behind research studies that will help bring this broader out. And you can go look at their 100 videos that they have and the testimonials of all the different people and all the psychiatrists that are now using this as a frontline therapy, because they're realizing our pharmaceutical approach to all of this stuff isn't solving the underlying problem. It all tends to be an energy problem inside of our cells, and that for everything other than red blood cells. Red blood cells don't have mitochondria, but our brain cells do. Our tissue does. Our skin, everything else runs off of mitochondria, or we believe the ATP that's generated by the mitochondria is the energy for most of the body and the cells. There's other energy sources we won't get into. But as the cell, those mitochondria, they can either choose to burn glucose, which in and of itself is not a problem. It's us excessively spiking that glucose and getting into a hyperglycemic state, which then also means a hyperinsulinemic state, because we have to clear, we only have about 4 grams, about the equivalent of 4 raisins worth of glucose in our blood at any one time. And every time we eat things that spike it way up, the insulin has to go up, and that's what now creates this whole insulin resistance across the body. So it winds up becoming, we wind up damaging our mitochondria by running them too much on excessive amounts of glucose. But they can also, just like a hybrid car engine, have 2 fuel sources. Instead of running on the glucose, they can also very happily run on fatty acids that we consume with our meals, break down, and then in our liver, we convert some of those fatty acids to ketones. And thus you heard the term the keto diet, or ketogenic and everything. It all comes from these ketones that come from fat oxidation, using fat in our body and across all of our cells. Well, much of our body runs better on fatty acids and ketones than it does on glucose. But because we're so insulin resistant, our fat cells are so trapped by high levels of insulin, not allowing us to get at that fat, because we're so insulin resistant from pounding ourselves with excessive amounts of glucose and insulin for a decade, 2 or 3. That's why all of these conditions are just insulin resistance run amok in different parts of our bodies, manifesting as blood pressure problems, as diabetes problems, as chronic kidney disease, because both the high glucose and the blood pressure is what attacks the kidneys and destroys the nephron inside of there that are filtering our blood and doing everything. And thus you do that long enough, you need dialysis. What a terrible way to have to survive and live, hooked to a machine 6 hours, 3-4 times a week. So yes, everything has one basic root cause. And we address these things. We go back to living, at least from a nutritional standpoint, a diet like our ancestors used to. We get proper sun. We all used to be relatively connected to the earth. And for most of existence, if we put a sandal or a shoe on, it was leather, and it still allowed us to get the charge and put charge back into the earth. You might have heard of grounding as a scenario
Yeah.
with all of this. Well, now, we live inside tech centers and offices that are blue light giving us toxicity levels of blue light, and the rubbers on our soles don't allow us to connect to the earth anymore. We're told to avoid the sun, which I can go hours into just what's critical about being in the sun. Anyhow, so yes, both those conditions very quickly, and you can go again, look at Virta Health, which is where Dr. Sarah Hallberg became the chief medical officer of that company, reversing tens of thousands of type 2 diabetics through disease management programs at the employers. And go look at Metabolic Mind, and you can find the psychiatrists around the world who are using this to reverse all of these mental health conditions.
Wow. So uh, now I'm speechless. So let's talk let's talk about the matrix as I previously mentioned. So why is this all happening while uh, anything and everything that the the billionaire companies, right? The trillionaire companies could manufacture. Why do they choose this? And why do they put us in a cycle that we cannot get out of unless you break the matrix? So as soon as you're born, you're consumed with a lot of sugar, you're consumed with a lot of fat, like in terms of bad fat, I mean, right? Like oils. So everything is corrupted, and then you end up having diseases, and then they sell you medicines. So I don't know if you have an answer to it,
Well,
but
I do, and there's all different ways to describe it. One way is just that it's cradle to grave profit for organizations which have common interests of, well, if we can get people off breast milk, we're now selling baby formula with soy, and that soy is going to have issues when being consumed by the young babies. Um, we have too many mothers having gestational diabetes during their pregnancy because they're so high in their different breakfast cereals, Coca-Colas, Mountain Dews, and everything else that, we stress eat a lot. I mean, there's so many things that wrap into all this. Life is difficult. Life has always been difficult, but it's just whether you're here in America, where we do not have what people would refer to as a socialized medical system, or you're in the UK or Canada, where they do have socialized medical systems, they don't have quite as bad metabolic issues, but they're right behind us, because the doctors still are not taught, and they're still working with just part of the medical literature that is available to all of us. But they get put on the hamster wheel, and they have now 10, 12-minute appointments, and you can't learn and teach what the patient needs in a 10, 12-minute thing. And then if you just also go back to, and some of this is unfortunately, and I don't want to throw any one religion under the bus, because we all have historical cultural dogma that we deal with from how we were raised. We were all kind of placed into one religion. But if I'm going to just kind of help you understand the landscape of what we're living in, and it makes sense when you look at it from a time standpoint, because again, you remember you said 100, 200 years ago, these
yeah,
diseases of modernity that we now call chronic conditions that are easily reversed once you start understanding what they are and how to get away from them. But a lot of how we kind of crafted the modern food system came out of a religion, and most people don't understand this. So, have you heard of Kellogg's cornflakes?
yes.
So, I believe it's John Harvey Kellogg. He was raised by the founder of the Seventh Day Adventist Church. And he and his brother both went on to become doctors. They were in the basement of this Battle Creek, Michigan home printing the leaflets and all of the marketing information for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So they were indoctrinated into all of these things. And this is back in the late 1800s where we didn't have refrigerators. We didn't have the ability to get fresh meat from the farms and keep it fresh long enough till it could be consumed in the cities. And lots of people were suffering from all different kinds of maybe extra bacteria on those things because where we were going, we were moving too far away from where the food sources were. So anyhow, I believe her name is Ellen White, who is kind of the matron that had the 2000 visions that religion is based on. Also believe that if you eat meat and do these different things, it's going to lead men to become alcoholic. They're going to abuse their wives. Kids are going to abuse themselves. I won't go into what that means, but this became a major overarching things. And so John Harvey Kellogg actually in the early 1900s created all of these different food substances such as cornflakes, peanut butter, and all of these different things to be replacements from animal-based foods and from animal proteins and fats. Well, it wound up becoming incredibly wildly successful, and he became what we would now call a billionaire, but ultra millionaire, put him in the class of the great capitalists of the day. And Ellen White took his brother, another MD, and went to Australia and New Zealand and created a company and the healthcare system called sanatorium. And we used to call hospitals sanatoriums. And so it comes off of all of this. And so they were heavy duty into here's all the processed food. They make money. And because they're a nonprofit religion, they don't have to pay taxes on anything. They train the doctors. And so after the Catholic Church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the largest teaching organization in the world. And here in America, in California, in Loma Linda, California, there's a medical school. Now you have to be a Seventh-day Adventist to be brought in and taught that. And most of these children were all raised in a vegan to vegetarian spectrum. But there are many doctors who all of a sudden realized, oh my God, as they got into practice, some of their patients came across Dr. Atkins' book and realized that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be avoiding all of this because my patients who go to this diet started reversing their diabetes, their obesity, and all these different issues cleared up. So there are doctors who came out of that, broke out of it, and they're now some of the leading metabolic health doctors out on YouTube sharing, here's how you do all of this. I found them early in 28 during my whole epiphany, like Dr. Sarah Hallberg. But even so whether you're whichever system, a private or a social healthcare system you have, the doctors are all still trained the same, and they still have the pharmaceutical reps knocking on the doors. There isn't another profit market for the metabolic health because who's going to pay 2 million pharmaceutical reps to start calling on all of the doctors' offices and say, eat meat, fish, and egg, above ground vegetables, and everything's going to go away. I mean, there's no profit in that. So that, those are some of the underpinnings of, and then we went to an industrialized society, food that could be moved around without refrigeration, thus the cereals and all these different little things. And what we now call processed foods, simply they're killing us now slowly. It's not toxic poison that you eat it today and you're dead tonight. But it slowly starts manifesting into insulin resistance, which becomes all of those other conditions when left unchecked. And the doctors who realize this can very easily navigate their employee or their patients back to health. Coaches like myself, I don't have patients, I have clients. And I've helped clients reverse many crippling conditions and situations. And one lady just came off of a GLP-1 called Wegovy, which is like an Ozempic. And she lost it before meeting me the year before. She lost 120 pounds but still had crippling arthritic pain, brain fog, and all these other medical issues that she was on many different medications for. We came across each other, struck up a conversation, and I kind of showed her my before and after, my 115-pound weight loss transformation. She goes, I lost 120 last year on this drug. She goes, but then it stopped working and I went off of the drug. And within the first 2 weeks, I put 20 pounds right back on. And I'm like, well, that's very common because they never taught you the foods to be eating. So you went back to the foods that you originally became obese with. And once you come off that drug, it all just comes back because the root cause is what you're putting in your mouth. So I just simply told her, I go, well, did you know that if you just change those foods, you make all the GLP-1 that you want. You don't need to be injecting it for hundreds of dollars or $1,000 a month into your body. You can just, like an EpiPen would, you can just change how you eat. And over 5, 6 weeks, 20 years of crippling arthritis where she was buying canes to use to walk and kind of crouched over and having to talk herself every morning when she wakes up to try to get out of bed because she's in such pain. Within 5, 6 weeks, we flipped her metabolism back to our native metabolism that every baby is born in, being fat adapted, living in nutritional ketosis. And now she's walking, like a teenager again, no pain, brain fog's lifting and gone. She's off of the GLP-1, making it all herself because she's eating meat, fish, eggs, some vegetables.
Wow.
It's that simple.
Wow. So we gotta get this word out because this is crazy. And this is something that I've heard for the first time, and most of you all might have heard it for the first time. Thank you so much, Brett. In this short amount of time, you have given us so many insights. For other insights, people who want to reach out to you, how do they reach out to you?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I have a website called mymetaboliclife.com. So they'll find my phone number, which again is just 262-255-9545 here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my address is, you can just click on contact us on the website and it shoots me an email. So those are the best ways of finding me. I also have a My Metabolic Life Facebook page. As I said, about to launch a My Metabolic Life, which already has subscribers waiting for my first content because they found me on other podcasts. And the other one called The Metabochondriacs is a second podcast that will be launched with my cardiologist friend, Dr. Ryan Cooley. And in fact, in the next hour, we're going to be launching or recording our first episode of that as soon as we're done here.
Wow. So things are coming up from Brett's side. You will be hearing more from him. So just go check out his website. Thank you so much, Brett, for such a great conversation. It was a pleasure to meet you today and an honor to host you.
Hey, Kiran, I greatly appreciate it. Happy to chat anytime you want. Okay.
Thank you so much again. With that said, I am your host Kiran Agrar signing off for the day. You guys take care. Bye guys. So now you may stop the recording, Brett.
There we go. Oh, okay.